Hello and welcome to this tutorial on Luminar 4. Now Luminar 4 does all kinds of stuff in terms of just processing your images, but in today's lesson we're actually just going to talk about sky replacement because this is a really cool feature. Now if this is something you've ever done in the past, you'll know that replacing skies can be quite difficult and getting the mask right and all the challenges that go with it. So let's look at how Luminar 4 can actually make a huge difference and make this process much faster. So this mountain is Mount Fitzroy, which is in Patagonia, and it sits between Argentina and Chile. You can see that we had backlighting and a reasonably boring sky for this morning that we got up. So one of the first things you have to think about when replacing a sky is what sky is going to make the most sense for the image. And we can go through some examples here. I've got 4 different images we're going to process. So we're not going to process these images to completeness. We're going to go ahead and actually just process the sky so you can see how that's done. I want to focus on that. But you have to give some thought to these things. You have to decide what's going to make sense for the scene. Does it feel reasonable? Do the clouds match the environment? Do you feel like the lighting is going in the right direction? Are the clouds lit? If in this case, right, the clouds would be lit from the back because of the mountain being lit from the back. So including clouds that have been lit from the front will probably not feel natural. So some of the considerations you have to have is what is the scene asking for and what is reasonable within the scene. So we'll take a couple of different looks. We're also going to talk about how you can use not only Luminar 4 with the sample skies that they provide, but also how you can use your own skies to do this. So that's kind of cool that they allow you to bring in your own images. We're going to do this backlit version. We are actually going to do a frontlit version. And then we will look at this picture, which when I shot it, I think I saw something here, but it didn't really exist. So this is a really boring photo, but I want to show you how you can liven it up and make it interesting. And then lastly, this image here taken in Cuba of a pup looking off of a roof. And it was a very boring sky. And so obviously I just went with the blowout. This is a fully processed image actually. So I'm going to show you how you can actually manipulate fully processed. The other 3 images haven't been processed at all. So we're going to go ahead and start here. Now I like to work within Photoshop. That's just my preference where I like to do all my work, and Luminar 4 is a plugin. So if you don't have Photoshop, you can use Luminar 4 as a standalone, and the process will be the same. You would just go open that program as opposed to opening a plugin like I'm going to. So to find it, we go ahead and, in my case of all these different filters, we'll come down to Skylum software and we'll pick Luminar 4. So let's just give that a second to open. All right, and here we are. So you can see over to the right that there's all kinds of different options. Along the bottom here are some quick looks, like you can, sort of pick some of the looks that they've already got put together. It happens to be on Essentials. We're actually not going to use these for this image. We're going to go over here. Now, the funny thing is when I first opened this, I found it totally counterintuitive because I was looking for something that said sky here and I couldn't find it. So after a little bit of research, I found that you actually have to go under this palette here, which is called Creative. So if you click on this, you'll see right at the top now that it says Sky Replacement. We'll go ahead and open this up. And when you open it up, you'll see that there's a sky selection. So this is if you're using not only their samples, but if you want to bring in your own. There are some advanced settings where you can change where the sky hits on the horizon. So you can kind of go, this is how much it blends, how soft the feather is, and then the position is up or down. So you can move the horizon line as you need. You can kind of change the lighting of the entire scene and the sky. If there's gaps, I haven't had to experience this, but you can close those gaps. You can change some more settings around the local sky that you're bringing in. You can defocus the sky if you really want to give it a depth of field. Now, this might be interesting if you're doing a bird or something like that, where you're trying to give the illusion of having shot it wide open, even though you might not have. So that's what that's for. And then the temperature and brightness of the sky. So you have some choices. You can also modify the mask and change the mask depending on what's in your scene. So there's a lot of options here. So let's first start by figuring out what sky we want. So if you click on sky selection, if you go to download new sky images, this will actually take you out to the Skylum website where you can actually buy more sky packages. So that's probably not the first place you're going to go. The original sky, self-evident, that's the boring sky we have. And then here's all kinds of different options that they have. And at the very bottom, you have load custom sky image. This is where you would select if you want to bring in your own sky for the scene. In this particular, I've got 4 different images that we're going to do, and I will use my own sky for some others. In this particular case, we're going to go ahead and use a sky that they provide. Let's just kind of go with some examples, though. You get a feel for what I was talking about in terms of them working or not working. Yeah, that might actually be okay. You can see how the whole image got toned a little bit blue. When you're choosing their skies, it actually does the toning for you, so that's kind of a nice lift there. Bright blue, you have some dramatic skies. Now this one probably doesn't work as well, partly because none of the rest of the sky image here is actually toned with pink, and you can see on our sky, original sky, that the mask did not differentiate from the mountains like it did here. It left our cloud, so it sort of means that we have to account for the fact that that cloud exists. So the fact that this cloud is pink, and there's some pink down here in the bottom right, then this bright blue and white sky is not probably the right choice. You can add a night sky, which is sort of interesting. You might be able to get away with that. And although that's not the direction we're going to go today, there are some choices. There are 2 night sky choices. Both of them are actually sort of interesting. So that's something to think about. I prefer to go out and shoot my Milky Way shots. And then you have some sunset choices, right? And now you just got to figure out, of all of these choices that we just experienced, which make the most sense. Now, actually, this one is probably not too bad because these are hued a bit pink, although a little bit wrong directionally, right? Because this is coming from the left and this pink is coming from the right. So it's not quite giving the right effect, but you might be the only person to know that because you're the one changing. In this particular instance, I liked this particular sky. So the pink is not completely unreasonable here because there's a lot of toning and coloring down on the bottom, which existed in our original. But you can see that you can sort of just drop in any sky that you like. And I think that the fact that this exists and it does such a great job on the mask, that's where the benefit of this is. Because at the end of the day, masking some of this stuff without losing some of the spires and peaks and edges is very difficult to do. I think that Skylum here does an excellent job of masking. And actually, in hindsight, there's a helicopter in this. See, I would have to clone that out in the final image. So why don't we go ahead and go for it? We'll take the golden one. This one seems a little bit more reasonable, right? If you look, you've got light coming from basically the similar side. So what this is Sky Sunset 4, and I think it works pretty well. So here you're able to move the scene up and down. We might be able to actually move that down to get rid of the helicopter. So in this case, it actually brought it forward. Now, that's one of the things you have to ask yourself. It seems like when I've played with this, that sometimes the skies go up and down, sometimes it zooms in. I think on theirs, it sort of zooms in. Probably is not completely unreasonable. Once you sit with it a minute, it feels pretty comfortable. And it actually helps blend our original piece of cloud here with their cloud. So maybe we'll just go with that, and now I don't have to bother cloning. Now, you could go further once you're in here and make choices using Luminar to finish the rest of your edit, right? So you can do your basic adjustments under light. You have some enhancing adjustments. This is, you can just kind of play and see how this comes out. And actually it looks like it's kind of toned this a little bit red. That's interesting. You've got color adjustments, black and white, detail enhancing, denoising, so on and so forth. So at this point, you've got what I would call your base image. And you can now either finish the process here in Luminar, or you can take it back to Lightroom and finish if that's your preference, or you could take it back to Photoshop and finish in Camera Raw, or with adjustment layers. Lots of options here, but the hard part was getting sky in, and so we've gone from this completely boring sky, which you can see in the bottom here, the samples still show you your original sky, to something much more dramatic and interesting, and frankly, the sky we would have liked the day we shot it. So we can go ahead and just hit apply. Takes a second to do your processing. You'll see that up at the top. And in my case, the next thing you see is the change happening here in Photoshop. Now, like I said, I would consider this now the base image, and I would now take it for my processing and my workflow out into Camera Raw and then process it as one total image. I would suggest that generally, especially in something where you've got so much going on, that it makes sense to actually combine the sky first, then finish it as a photo, as opposed to trying to go back to all of your photos that you've already processed and drop one in. The Cuba dog, we can go to that one next. That one's a little bit easier because there's not a lot going on in this image, but if you had like a full landscape or whatever that you've already completely processed, it might be hard to get a sky to match. It might be a lot more effort. So let's go ahead and we'll look at this one next. And in this case, we're going to use my own sky. So again, filter, if you're using Photoshop, it's filter and then find the plugin and open it. Here we go. Again, got to hit this little creative palette here. So we're going to go select that. And now sky replacement. We'll hit sky selection and load custom sky. So I have actually in my Lightroom catalog, I have a folder with probably 3,000 sky images. I have a whole blog on, shooting the sky and making sure that you're constantly thinking about where you are and what skies are out there, because there's always opportunity to do this. I'm a big fan of creating the art that I want. So if you're a purist and you don't like to make change, then this video is probably not for you. But if you are looking at this as this is my artwork and I can do whatever I want with it, especially if you've already captured your own secondary images for skies, then this program is going to be awesome. And I do collect skies everywhere I go. If I have a day at a venue, for instance, say Cuba, and I have blank skies like this, I will go out, and if there's a good sky day, I will go capture skies in that location, because I like to try to combine the right skies, the right feeling of skies for the location. And you have to sort of be careful, because there's places on the planet where certain types of sky make sense. For instance, it might be wispy, light, kind of hazy clouds over a desert and big white puffy clouds over the Palouse in Washington State, and mixing those and saying this puffy clouds happened over the desert might not work. So you have to give that a little bit of thought. So it's always nice to capture skies in your location. In this case, we're going to go ahead and grab this particular sky. In this lighting, dropping a purple sky in isn't going to work. It doesn't make sense. Even an evening sky like this one to the left here isn't going to work, because I could maybe if I wanted to tone the rest of the image, but I don't really want to work that hard. I just want to get a good sky. So we're going to go ahead and take some clouds. Now, right off the bat, you can see that it's really dropped in quite nicely. Now, one of the things I noticed when I first look, and you have to be careful, you want to look at all your edges, is that there's this weird kind of haziness down here along the bottom edge of the sky where it meets the edge of the frame, and that's not reasonable. Partly that is this blending here, so you got to go ahead and just go ahead and take it off, and you'll see that the sky fills the rest of the way in. So that's kind of easy peasy and done. The other choice there would have been to maybe notice it after the fact. There's actually still a hair of a line, easily fixed by cropping when I get back into Photoshop. Now in this particular instance, I think the sky is actually not half bad. Let's go ahead and play around with the numbers a little bit. See if this doesn't take care of it. All right, so just by moving the position of the horizon line, I've actually gotten rid of this. So I'm not going to need to crop it. It went ahead and moved the entire sky down. And this is just a matter of playing. Like you can see, I've moved it up. And in this case, it doesn't work. If I had an ocean in here, that might have been okay. But because we're trying to move further downward, even -50 doesn't quite cover the problem. So we just keep moving until we see what we want. So 68, 70, whatever. And now the line is gone. It also brought behind our pup here a kind of a brighter light, which really helps him stand out. So with very little effort, we have gone from the sky that's down here in our examples, this bald sky, which he's still super cute in my opinion. That's why I shot it. But even this is a lot more dramatic, just dropping this one sky. And the cool thing is I feel good about it in that, yes, it's a composite image, but both images are mine. I'm not using somebody else's artwork. I've created this with my own. Now, that's not for everybody either. So if you don't have a big collection, feel free to play around. The only thing that I would say about using theirs is at some point, all your skies are going to be repetitive. So it's great for that one-off that you don't have something to fit. But if you have your own skies to drop in, I think that's the way to go. And it'll continue to make your imagery look unique. So we're going to go ahead and hit apply. And there you go. Pretty easy peasy. So let's move to the next one. We'll go with this frontlit image. So this is one of the mornings that we got up. No clouds, nothing going on. Big bright blue sky. For most of humanity, this is considered a beautiful day. I think as a photographer, this has to be, at least in my opinion, one of the worst scenarios. I much prefer to have something going on in the sky, and frankly, I would take rain over a clear day. That's me. But I like the drama of skies. So this was, it's a beautiful picture, and I was there, so I'm obviously not going to miss the opportunity. But at the same time, I would much have rather seen something going on in the sky that morning. But the neat thing is because of my way I look at it and the fact that I capture skies all over the place, I've recognized that as long as I get a solid picture out of it, I will have ultimately an image I want because I'll drop skies in. Now keep in mind that none of these images that we're looking at have had any work done to them. I've not processed them in any single way. This is literally straight out of camera and right into Luminar. So in this case, I'm also going to use a sky of my own. Now, again, you got to remember to think about what skies fit. So let's, for just example, we'll use this one. We'll say, oh, that's like really cool. Does it make sense? Now, mind you, there's a different horizon here, so I would have to come in and I have to move the horizon down to get it out. That may make sense. Honestly, in all the days that I spent in Patagonia, didn't see clouds like this, so I suppose if I wanted to, I could make this work, and somebody else may not know, because you got to remember it's about the viewer. Like, does the viewer believe it? So this is probably not a totally unreasonable sky, but it was a bright blue day, and in many respects, I tried to honor the fact that that was what I had. So actually had a different choice originally for this sky, which was a day with just blue sky, only some clouds. So I feel like when I go through this exercise, I want to kind of keep the basis to be the same. That's a choice I make about it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be that way. So let's go ahead and make some edits to this. I moved, in this case, after playing with it, I decided I wanted to move the sky up a little bit, get a little bit of the rolling clouds further behind it. The whole scene needs to be relit because the clouds are very blue and the mountain isn't. So I start kind of playing with the lighting, which is, in this case, all I did was brighten things up. It probably was a pretty subtle change. But you can sort of see along that bottom edge there that the clouds are getting brighter. I kind of landed in around there. This is not having a whole lot of effect. And a lot of times this is exactly how I'll come into this. I will just play with things until I go, yeah, that's what I feel. And it's only way to do it is to be creative and just play around and see what makes you feel good. Under advanced settings, I didn't make any change here. There's really no gap to be closed, so there's nothing to worry about. I did not change the sky either. There's no reason to defocus, but this is a good example of showing you what I'm talking about. In this case, I'm probably shooting at f11. That'd be my guess. F8, f11. I don't even think I was up at f16. But in which case, that point to that is that everything should be basically in focus at this kind of distance. But say, for instance, this was more of a portrait or an animal, I could come in here and just defocus the sky. So once it takes a second to set itself, the mountain comes in. Now, interesting, it gives like almost a toy effect in this landscape, right? It gives you that sort of tilt shift. Kind of cool, maybe. But if you're not looking for that, that's fine. In this kind of a landscape, I'd probably leave it all to be in focus because that's what people would expect. But if you had a bird or an animal, then defocusing the sky is kind of cool. And so it's our image. It's just the sky is all blurred out. So I'll go ahead and take that out. But in this case, I've played a little bit with the temperature given the fact that the mountain itself is so warm. So come up a little bit. Maybe in and around there. So all I've done now is just warm the sky a little bit, make it feel a little bit more cohesive, and then change the entire exposure of it just because it's a bright day. So maybe something in and around there. Now in this particular image, I'll show you a few other tricks that the Luminar has. So I'm kind of done with dropping the sky in. We'll stop there and we will actually come down here to Mystic. So under Creative, not only do you have the sky replacement, but I could add sun rays, more drama, more of a matte look, mystical look, a glow if you were looking for an Orton glow, some film grain, fog. There's all kinds of different options here to play with. And I think this is where it just comes to goofing around and seeing what you like. So in this case, this is going to add, this is actually very much like a glow to me when I was playing with it. So it's kind of the first place I went. I think about there, kind of give it a little bit of an enhancement. I didn't change anything in the shadows, but I like that it starts to get an ethereal look to it. And then we will come back out and actually go into our essentials. And here you have AI enhance. So again, you have lighting if you want to change the exposure. You know, if I want to bring down the highlights a bit just to take the glow off of them, the glare out of them. AI enhance is the next place I sort of went to see where that was going to take me. And most of this was just playing around and seeing what I liked and what I didn't like. So you can sort of see the difference. This little button here, this will erase it. So if you do this, you'll, wipe out whatever change, which may not be what you're going for, because then you'd actually have to like dial it back in. But if you just toggle on and off, you can see the difference. So that AI enhance, sort of did a little bit down here. Actually, I think if I remember correctly, I actually opened up my shadows a little bit. So I can open up the foreground just a hair there. And then in enhance, now you can sort of see the difference of what the AI enhance has done. I think that's about where I got to. So now, again, with not much effort, I've completely finished this. This could be a totally finished image. Now, again, I will say I haven't added any sharpness or any of the things that I would normally do in my workflow. So even if I went through these edits in Luminar, I would probably go through the rest of my process to finish it up. In this case, because most of it is actually processed, I would probably just do a high pass sharpening on it just to give my edges of the mountains some sharpness, because as you know, your camera on your raw files does not include sharpness. That's a JPEG function, and I shoot in RAW, so there's been no sharpening of the mountain at all. So that's something to think about. All right, let's do the last one. Now, I'd save this one for last because it's the hardest. So just with the fact that it's going to be more challenging, it goes really fast, but this is definitely a harder image. Now, as anybody who's ever tried to mask skies or trees like this, it is beyond difficult to get a good selection where you don't get a halo. So that's part of one of the things I thought was really pretty brilliant and easy about the Luminar process. It's just that it kind of happens and it's easy. So let's go ahead and open this up in Luminar. Alrighty, there it is. And in this case, again, we're going to use a sky of mine. So we'll go back to sky. So we hit creative, go back to sky, sky selection, load a custom image. In this case, I want actually this one. Now, this is a little bit counterintuitive. I experimented with all of these. These are the same image, only flipped. So you can see the clouds at the top, this cloud's at the bottom. I know it's pretty small, but these are essentially, you can see they're the same image. This is taken the same day, probably slightly different direction, and obviously horizontal, and this one's vertical. So I liked the color. That was the direction I wanted to go. It's going to be an interesting kind of dramatic change, right? From this kind of bright white day to very colored and like toned for a sunrise or sunset. So it's a big dramatic change, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to use it. Now, in experimenting, I found that even though these were portrait, they were harder to manage than the horizontal, the landscape version. And part of that, if you think about it logically, yes, it's a vertical image or portrait image, but the sky itself is actually horizontal, so and landscape. So that is kind of how I ended up with this particular image as my choice. So let's go ahead and move this back over, select our sky, and hit open. Now, one thing I will say about it is that I have already processed the skies. So in other words, when I went through and I selected the skies I wanted to play with, I opened them up in, you could do it in Lightroom or Photoshop. I checked for artifacts, I checked for dust spots, I checked for, junk on the car window that I shot through or whatever. I got them clean. I got rid of the noise in them for the most part. Did a little work on the sky so that I created final sky images, so I wasn't having to go back and do that later when processing just the sky might be more difficult. So that's something to think about. Make sure you've gone through the energy and effort of fixing your skies before you use them, and that'll make life easier when you drop them in. So, all right, here we are. We've dropped our sky in. So our blending, we don't really need to change the feathering at the horizon at all. But I did move this up a little bit just because I felt that there was some more interest. You just kind of go until you see the sky you want. So say about there, that was really more just about getting some interest in the sky itself, right? The clouds and the modeling and the shape and everything. And on the exposure, I did brighten it up a little bit. Again, trying to tone with the fact that the sky was a bit brighter in the original. So at this point, we have a quandary, right? We have a different reflection in the water than we do in the sky. And I could fix this just in Photoshop, but Luminar does let you do it. So I'm going to show you how to do it in Luminar. You could take this into Photoshop now, bring in the sky image again, flip it yourself, and then blend it there. But it is nice that you can get the whole base image set into one program. So what we're going to do is come up to the top right here, and it says layers. We're going to go ahead and just click this. And now you'll see that we have this layer with the original image and this sky. If you come here over the word layers and there's a plus sign to the right, go ahead and click on that, and we're going to add a new image layer. That brings us back out to the browser. We again select the exact same sky and hit open. Now, in this case, because it's trying to fit, and I honestly don't know why this does it. I think it's just kind of maybe a glitch where it has taken the sky and fitted it to the entire frame. Whereas in the original image, it didn't do that. That's okay, we can fix it. So first off, we need to actually transform the layer because it's wrong and it's now stretched all out. It's kind of a cool shot, by the way, but it's still not what we need. So we have to go to this place right here below where it says layer transform. Now you can move it around and you can also stretch it. So I'm kind of getting it back to where it was so that it looks pretty close to what we have up top. Now, part of the reason I didn't change the blending mode yet on this is so I could do this piece of it. I'm trying to mirror what I see up here in the top part with what I have at the bottom, because for the most part, the reflection is going to be really close in size. So it doesn't need to be stretched or smaller or whatever. It just needs to sort of fit properly. Now, I feel like I've gotten a pretty good, this cloud is what I'm using really, because these are all kind of blocked. So I'm looking at this and it's pretty close. I could play with it maybe a little bit more, but it is what it is. Now, a reflection is going to be the opposite, right? So if you think about a mirror reflection that you've ever seen, it's reversing the image, not left to right, it's top to bottom. So I just need to flip this image over. If you look up to the top where it says layer transform, so it's telling us the size of our image, the angle, which we haven't turned. And then you have a flip. This is left to right, top to bottom, or just a little bit of an angle, like a rotate. So in this case, we just really want to go top to bottom. So that's our first step. Now we've mirrored the image, right? So we have our reflection, and you have to kind of figure out, well, where's this reflection going to land? And I'm going to guess to start probably in and around there. So again, lining these two up, not so much worried about over here, because remember we have dirt up here. We're really focusing on this part of the image. So you've got this little nub, that nub, and these two. So we're good to go. You come to the far right and it says done. Now my screen's probably bigger. I'm using a wide 27-inch monitor. Stuff might be a little bit closer in for you. Just keep that in mind. It's kind of general locations. This obviously doesn't work because we don't see the reflection of our trees. It does not completely right yet, but the easiest way to fix this is to go onto your blend mode. These blend modes will be the same as they are in Photoshop. So you'll see that they pretty much represent all the same things. Interestingly enough, they have only brought in the blend modes that are most used by photographers, which I love, because if in Photoshop this is a much bigger list, and it's not that you can't use them, but they just are not the most commonly used. So these guys have brought in only the commonly used, which kind of keeps it a little bit easier to manage as you go. There are a lot of choices here. You know, you can darken. Now the idea behind darken is that the darker pixels come in. So in this case, darken doesn't really work. Multiply is multiplying the two together. This actually doesn't work too badly because reflections tend to be darker. So maybe we're going to go that path. Color burn, clearly not the right choice today. Lighten, just the opposite of darken. Lighten brings the lighter pixels forward. So you can see that everything that's lighter is now moved over. Screen, same kind of idea. It's a little bit like multiply, only in reverse. So it's working with the light pixels. Overlay, soft light, which is an overlay only, just not as aggressive. So overlay is actually not too bad here either. So if we go back to multiply, kind of darkens the whole image down, where overlay doesn't quite have such a dramatic darkening effect. So we'll have to think about that. Soft light's probably not quite enough because the reflection should be darker than the sky. So we might have to do a little bit of work in post as well. Hard light, clearly not the right choice. Difference, we're not looking to give ourselves a negative image. Subtraction, nope. Hue, very much like soft light, except for the light that is, I'm going to choose it for a second. The light that comes here right at the horizon, that's not realistic to what the reflection should look like. So that's not right. Here we go. Hit the wrong button. Color is only bringing in the color. Might be able to get away with color. It's often very similar to overlays. And luminosity is only bringing in sort of the lighter or the darker parts, I guess, in this case, that looks for the luminance of the pixels. So I think we could get away with color. Now in color, if you notice that, we actually lose some texture. So even though the color doesn't feel totally unnatural, we're losing texture. So I think the choices here are overlay or multiply. I think I'm going to go with multiply. I think the original one I went through, though, I went with overlay. So just saying, you get to make changes as you go. Now, first off, you can see that I have sky here that's not covered. Now, I could stretch this. I don't think it's necessary. I don't really want my reflection or my horizon to be dead center, so I'm actually going to crop this. So I don't really mind that I'm not getting the whole sky. I like it sort of better in a different format. So we'll see that in a minute when I get back to Photoshop. The other thing that I do appreciate about this is I like how it has toned the snow here to give me the same light on that snow. It's not as bright and white as it was in the original image. You sort of, if you can sort of remember that, but I like that it's gotten a pink hue to it. But I do need to do a little bit of fixing here because there's a hard edge, if you see it, right here in the back, almost like a train going by. And that is because that's where the sky image ends, and that's not quite right. And it's already being toned by the image above. So if we come in and we hit Edit Mask, we have some choices. We can create a radial mask, a gradient mask, a luminosity mask, or a brush. I'm just going to pick brush. And if you look at the top, you have the choices of paint or erase. So I'm going to go ahead and pick erase. I am just going to just swipe across a little bit there to get rid of that hard edge. And that's it. So I think we're pretty much set on where the sky lands. I'm going to hit apply. It's going to take a second to come in. So we go from this to that, which I personally like substantially better. It's a little bit dark, but again, I have not processed this image at all. And then in this particular instance, as I mentioned, I would crop. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to crop up into my tree because I don't think I need the whole tree. And I am going to crop from the right in, mostly, like it'll start here, because I don't want this building. It's one thing, it's covered in snow, and it draws my attention. And it's also very hard shaped. Where everything else is tree and nature, this is definitely a man-made object, and I just don't need it. So I'm going to change the image to be maybe a little bit like that. And that's it. So to me, now this is the base image. Now, I may or may not ever use this image. It's not my favorite, but it was a good example of a reflection in doing the two steps. So, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I'm not sure I'm a total fan of the image to begin with, but it was a good one for the as an example of what you can do within Luminar. So that's why we used it. Anyway, in every one of these cases, this still needs work. It hasn't been, I would sort of add maybe some light and shadows, bring up the snow a little bit, not too dramatically. Again, this is a that lit image. So it is definitely, I can't brighten the front of it. Doesn't make any sense logically for the scene, but I would do some work. It hasn't been sharpened. This one, we did a little bit more work. We've toned it a little bit differently, but I would still go through and at least do some selective sharpening so that mountains had some more sort of clarity to them. They're being front lit. They could definitely stand, actually even have, use the clarity or texture sliders in Lightroom or Camera Raw to sort of get those to be more edgy, because things in bright light have more sharpness than things in shadow. So that's something to think about. We just did this one. So again, I would sharpen the, trees and probably brighten the sky a little bit and open up the shadows a hair just to give more life to the scene. But that's where I'd head with this one. And then lastly, our little pup here was already processed, so I probably wouldn't do very much with him, but other than just adding the sky. So in the description of the video, you will find a link for Skylum, so you can get Luminar as well as a discount code to get a little bit off the price. So thanks again for watching. I hope you learned something. Take care. See you soon.